Make your popcorn. It's time for Saturday night at the movies. Hey there, Fiber Junkies! Welcome back to the Color Cauldron. I'm Johanna, the owner and dyer behind Potion Yarns and host of this podcast. Today is one of my favorite segments. It's time for our monthly segment called Saturday Night at the Movies. This is my favorite because we get to enjoy a little cinema. And this year we've been focusing on vintage cinema, although we're not going to stick exclusively to vintage films going forward, but we will have quite a few more of the vintage ones. So if you've been enjoying the look back at Hollywood's golden era, like I have, that will continue, but we are going to also feel free to mix in some more modern films. But we also get to pair that with a specially selected pattern. And all of the films that we review on Saturday Night at the Movies and watch have to do with fiber arts in some way. So either there's something in the story about it, or there's a scene of someone knitting or crocheting or spinning or sewing, or in some cases there's some really great hand knits on display. So it's really, really fun because we get to indulge our love of fiber with our love of cinema all at the same time. This month we are taking a trip back to 1941 for a fun and silly and just feel-good film. Not one of the better-known classics. In fact, it was one I had never seen before. I just saw it recently for the first time and was really excited to add it to our queue because it's just fun, feel-good, silly, short little movie from the 1940s. But it features Jimmy Stewart and Paulette Goddard as the starring roles. And it also has some really fun, interesting historical context because one of the characters in there is played by the real-life band leader at the time, Horace Heidt, and his band is featured prominently in the film. They play a lot of music. So there's some absolutely great swing dance music in there, including even some swing scenes. But there's a lot of really great 1940s music if you enjoy that kind of style like I do, if you enjoy the 40s jazz. So the film that we're doing this month is called Pot of Gold, and it is remarkable for a couple of reasons. Get down. First, like I said, it features a well-known band leader and his musical group at the time, but also it's a cute, fun little story about Jimmy, who is played by Jimmy Stewart, and he is a failed music shop owner. His music shop, in the very beginning, we see that he's not doing well. He's not making money. He's not selling anything. He's struggling to make ends meet. And so he ends up having to give up his music shop and go work for his rich uncle in another town. And his rich uncle works in the food industry. He has a food factory, and he wants Jimmy to come help him run it because he doesn't have any kids of his own to pass the business on to. So Jimmy agrees reluctantly. He doesn't want to go, but he reluctantly agrees to go help because he's really out of money and out of options. As soon as he arrives in the town, however, before he even gets a chance to stop in at his uncle's house, he kind of connects with this really pretty Irish girl named Molly, played by Paulette Goddard. And Molly is from a big Irish family, music-loving Irish family, and she's part of this group of neighbors who get together and they play music all the time, and they live right next door to his uncle. So they're constantly playing their band music and practicing. They've been trying to get their band to really take off, and it hasn't been super successful, but they're really good musicians. And they practice all the time and drive the uncle crazy because he can't stand all this music going on all the time. He's kind of a grouchy old guy, and he hates music, and he hates young people, and he hates fun and all this stuff. And so they have this kind of family feud going on between the two feuds. Or between the two families. So Jimmy arrives in the midst of all of this, and he really hits it off with the pretty young Molly and strikes up a conversation with her and ends up kind of joining in on her side. And there's a scene where he is outside with the group and his uncle comes by and they're having an argument over the uncle demanding that they quit practicing next to his house that the band needs to leave or shut up and not be practicing anymore, and the band is saying, we have just as much of a right to our property as you have to yours. We find out the uncle has been trying to buy the property from the matriarch of the Irish family for some time, and she won't sell, and he's really angry because he wants to expand his factory, and he can't figure out how to get her land because she won't sell it to him. And so into the midst of this feud comes innocent Jimmy, and a fight breaks out between the two sides, and in the middle of it, he throws a tomato at his uncle to impress this girl that he likes, and hits his uncle square in the head, but nobody knows where it came from except Molly, who saw it. And so he kind of joins forces with the Irish family, and they take him under their wing and are greeting him and making him part of the family. They have no idea that he's the nephew of their biggest enemy. In the meantime, the uncle has no idea that Jimmy's the one who threw the tomato, or that he's taken up with the daughter of the house next door and is basically in two camps. So Jimmy's got this weird, awkward, he's kind of in both camps at once, trying to keep everybody from figuring out who he really is and what his ties and connections are everywhere. And shenanigans ensue, of course. I'm not going to keep going and tell you more of that. But let's just say the uncle does not give up his search to find who threw the tomato and prosecute them. And Jimmy does not give up his pursuit of the beautiful young Molly. But being Irish, they have she has kind of a fiery temper, and they have some clashes along the way. So there's a lot of shenanigans and ups and downs, and mistaken identities, and then discovered identities, and discovered cover-ups, and all of these things going on. And in the midst of it, there's some really great 1940s band music, and there's some absolutely stunning vintage hair, some absolutely beautiful vintage costumes. It's a lot of fun, so I highly recommend you check it out. I don't know how easy it is to find. I found mine on Amazon Prime, so I will put a link to that below. I will also see if I can find it, a link to a DVD. You might try searching it on YouTube. You might be able to rent it on YouTube. It's not one of the more popular films of the time. It's not well known like Casablanca or Citizen Kane or anything like that. It's just kind of a little, silly, fun, lighthearted comedy in Jimmy Stewart's early career, so it's not one of his better known films, not one of Paulette Goddard's better known films, but it's really cute and totally worth the watch. It's a really feel-good, fun family movie, and definitely worth checking out. So that is our film this month. Where does our knitting or fiber arts scene come in? I do have a little bit of a confession for you. This month there is no scene of a person actually doing the knitting or the crocheting or spinning or whatever. I really was hoping for one in this film, and there just weren't any. However, I decided that this was still going to count as our Saturday night at the movies because there are a couple gorgeous examples of hand crochet and hand knit. I actually think it's all hand knits, but there's the first one, I'm not sure if it was knit or crochet because it was a little bit of a grainy black and white movie and I couldn't really tell. So go watch it and tell me what you think. Is it crochet or is it knit? But the first one is there's a scene where Molly is out on her balcony and she has definitely fallen for the handsome young stranger Jimmy, and she's daydreaming about him a little bit, and she's leaning on her balcony and there's this beautiful hand-worked Afghan laying over the side of the balcony that she's kind of like leaning on. I can't remember if she wraps up in it or if she just leans on it, but it's really prominent in the scene, and there's a bunch of close-ups of her like being really, really dreamy and singing about Jimmy and stuff, and you get to see the blanket pretty well. And so when I was looking at the close-ups, to me it looked like, at first I thought it was crochet, and then I looked closer and I was like, I think that's a knit stitch, but I'm not positive. I could be wrong. So go watch the movie and leave me a comment and let me know if you think it's crochet or knit on the blanket that she leans on. That's the first one. The second one is later on in the film. There is an absolutely gorgeous little crop top that she wears. It's definitely hand knit, and it's got this welted rib, and it just kind of comes tight across the bust and then buttons in the middle. And it's really, really short, so it doesn't go down very far. She wears it with high-waisted trousers, I think. And it's got short little sleeves with a little bit of volume at the top. And it's just a really simple, cute little knit top, very summery, kind of almost beachy feel. It's really, really cute. And I got very excited when I saw it because I was like, oh my gosh, I have that pattern for that top. So that's our project this month, our pattern. So this is the pattern. Hopefully you can see that, but like I said, I will try to drop in another photo here. Hopefully we'll get a better look at it. I did find it listed on Ravelry. I don't know if you can download the pattern through Ravelry or if you have to find it on another website, but I know I was able to find the actual pattern online. I have not actually knit this one yet. It's one that I had found years ago and printed off and then completely just haven't gotten around to making it yet. It's in my I want to make this but I haven't gotten to it yet category. But this pattern is almost exactly what Paulette Goddard wears in the film. It's definitely the same silhouette shape, the same welted horizontal ribs like that with the little buttons in the front. I'm pretty sure it's almost exactly, if not exactly, what she wears. It's called the Nor'easter, like northeaster, but with a little hyphen. The Nor'easter pattern, and it was originally made from the company called Sun Glow Wool. So like a lot of vintage patterns from the 30s and 40s and 50s, there aren't a lot of detailed, there isn't a lot of detailed information about the pattern like we are used to having today. So I will say this is a great vintage pattern, but it is an authentic vintage pattern that has not been updated yet. So it might be a little tricky for you. If you're a beginner, you might want to get some help from somebody who has more experience on making sure that you have enough wool and everything, and making sure you understand all the instructions. But it does take, I looked up the kind of wool that it was originally knit with on the internet, and it is a fingering weight, just plain wool yarn. You could also make it in a superwash yarn nowadays, but originally it was just in a plain non-superwash wool because they didn't have superwash back then. But it is a fingering weight, and it says that you need needles in size 10 and 12, but this was vintage sizes and quite possibly from Great Britain instead of America anyways. I'm not actually sure where this pattern came from, but in a lot of vintage patterns, a size 10 and a 12 would not be what we think of as 10 and 12 because those are pretty fat needles in American modern size needles. In vintage patterns, especially if they came from Great Britain, that would refer to a really small needle size, so probably like a 2, a US size 2 or 3, something along those lines. So definitely make sure that you do your research before you just cast this thing on. I am really wanting to cast mine on, and I was really sad I didn't get a chance to start it at least, because I was going to try to show you some stitches on the needle and I had it all started, but I've been knitting really slowly lately with Baby Potion's due date coming up in just a couple weeks. I've had a ton of things on my plate and have not been knitting nearly as much as I used to, and garments especially these really fitted little vintage ones where you have to know your bust measurement and everything pretty precisely, I've definitely not been doing because my body is constantly changing right now. I don't know what to expect it to do after baby gets here, so I'm kind of trying to make more like loose flowy things and not as many garments right now. So I'm sorry I don't have this to show you because I haven't knit it, but I think it would be really, really cute in a lot of different colors. One of the things I love about this pattern is the stitch pattern is super simple because it's just a like ribbed pattern. So you could do this in just about anything. You could do it in plain, solid Knit Picks fingering wool if you want, if you're on a budget and you just want something solid and simple. You could do it in a really great indie dyed speckle yarn. You could do it in a fabulous, rich, dimensional indie dyed tonal yarn. You could do it in all different colors and it would look great in anything. I would probably stick to a solid, semi-solid, or speckle for it, but you could actually do it in a variegated as well because the ribbing, I'm calling it welts because that's what I've heard it called before, but it's basically like horizontal ribbing, but the ribbing on the bodice part would actually break up. It's simple enough of a stitch pattern that you could use a more variegated yarn if you wanted and still get a really cool effect. But I think I like kind of the traditional semi-solid or speckle idea because I think it would go with more things. The sleeves are a little bit long because it was from the 1940s, so the short sleeves go down to about there on the model. I would probably shorten those up just a tiny bit because I'm short and small with short arms, and I like to shorten my sleeves a little bit for these vintage patterns oftentimes because that's just a little bit extra. So you could save yourself a little bit of wool there. Or you could make them longer if you wanted and make it just like a crop top with like 3/4 sleeves or even long sleeves. So there's a lot of fun things you can do. This is a free pattern. I'm pretty sure, I don't believe I had to pay for it, but I will put a link to where you can find at least information about the pattern, if not the pattern itself. I'm going to do my best to try and actually find it for you. But if I can't, I'll at least put the Ravelry page down there. And yeah, I think it would be really, really fun. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is a 1940s vintage pattern, and it has not been updated at all since it was originally released, at least not in the version that I found. You could probably find something similar on Ravelry if you were willing to put in several hours to devote to searching through the search functions and using filters and narrowing everything down. I did not do that, but keep in mind that in the 1940s, vintage patterns came usually in just one size, and people back then sewed a lot more than they do now. They knit a lot more, and so it was kind of expected that you would know how to resize your own patterns. So this comes in a bust size 32-34, which is fairly small. So if you're going to need to size up, you will need to do some math and calculations and make sure that you know how to size that up. If you are knitting for someone who is fitting the 32-34 inch bust, then you're golden and you're in luck. I would still definitely do a swatch and definitely read through the pattern before you cast on. Be willing to make adjustments as you go. Be willing to do the math. Unfortunately, a lot of these old patterns, especially the ones you can find for free on the internet, there are a lot out there. Where you can just search through tons and tons of patterns, but the downside to those things are that they frequently had a lot of errors released. They weren't test knit and tech edited and things like they are now, and a lot of the ones like this one were released by a yarn company or a wool company designed to be like, oh, here's a pattern so that you'll go buy our wool to make it. And so it was seen as, oftentimes they were free or very cheap, and so they weren't making a lot of money. It was more of an advertising thing, and so they didn't worry too much about it being perfectly error-free. And like I said, most people back then knew how to knit and sew and make adjustments, and so if people were knitting along and something didn't go right, a lot of times they would just adjust it on their own. They didn't have the internet to like write in and be like, hey guys, I found a problem in this pattern. There's no errata back then, and all that stuff. So definitely, I'm sorry that this has so many downsides to it. Like, it only comes in one size. You have to know what you're doing. This is definitely for the more intermediate and advanced knitters on here, and I am sorry about that. But it really is a simple little pattern, so I think if you can get past the fact that you may have to do a little bit more reconnaissance work in the beginning and make sure that you really get a good swatch and be willing to make changes and check your math as you go, I think it's a great little pattern. It's not, the knitting part wouldn't be that hard. It'd be more just making sure that you don't find any errors in it. But I'm sorry that it is that way, because I know we have a lot of people watching this channel who are not as confident with garments especially, and you need patterns that are a lot easier and already tech edited and have all the mistakes taken out. And honestly, I'm more of an advanced knitter, and I prefer that too. I love knitting old vintage patterns, but I get really frustrated when I'm like, I'm gonna have to go in and resize. I have to make sure I have to check all of their math for each row of the pattern. It's a lot. So it might not be for you, but for those of you guys who really love the vintagey look and you love that little crop top style, this could be a really fun challenge and a really fun exercise. We have talked before on the podcast about a fabulous resource book called Vintage Design Workshop. Vintage Design Workshop is my #1 recommendation for anyone who is interested in vintage knitting at all. And it's also a really good resource, even if you're not specifically into vintage, but you are wanting to get into designing. I highly, highly recommend this, because she walks you through not just like what was popular in different eras and how to find vintage patterns and where, and how to like look for elements in them that you can pull out, but she walks you through like how to analyze a vintage pattern, how to take your measurements, do a swatch, figure out the math. She has a bunch of formulas, and she does real life examples. She takes real actual vintage patterns, and then she takes her own real measurements or somebody else's real women measurements, not like skinny little models, but like actual real adult women, and she'll be like, okay, this is what I need to do to fix this, because this sweater is made for someone with a teeny tiny bust and waist, and I'm a little bit fuller, so I need to like increase that measurement, or I have a really short torso, I need to like shorten that up or whatever. And she walks you through the actual formulas to do it, as well as she also shows you how to take modern patterns and incorporate vintage style, like Peter Pan collars or puff sleeves or something like that. So it goes both ways. You can go from vintage to writing your own like updated pattern in the vintage style, or you can take a modern pattern, like just a basic cardigan or pullover or whatever, and add on vintage elements that will make it look a little more period, if that's something that you're into as well. And so it's a really great resource book, like I said, for anyone interested in design or altering knits. Even if you're not going to publish design patterns, you just want to be more comfortable with altering your own knits and getting exactly what you want. But especially if you're into vintage style, I highly recommend this book. It is worth every single penny and then some. And there are no patterns in the book, unfortunately. That's the only thing that would have made this better, is if she included a couple of patterns in the back of the book so that you could actually knit something from it. There are no patterns in the book. It's just like a workbook, almost like a textbook, but it's totally worth it, and it really, really makes it so much easier and so much less stressful when you look at a vintage pattern like the one we're doing this month and you feel overwhelmed and you're like, I don't even know where to start. Start here. She'll literally walk you step by step through how to do it. So this is a great resource and I highly recommend it. I am hoping to knit the little Northeaster crop top sometime, maybe next spring or summer, after baby's here and my body's calmed down a little bit. And to me, it just seems like a really summery top, like something you'd wear with some high-waisted pants or a cute skirt to go boating or on a little picnic or something. So I would love to get into doing that next year, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. So that's really all I have for you today. That's our fun little video, Pot of Gold, 1941. Now we did do our yarn clubs in the shop a little bit early this month because I am about to have a baby. So we will be doing our November Saturday night at the movies. I will probably be filming it early, but we will be releasing it closer to actual November, probably in November. I might do it the end of October, but probably in November. So they're not gonna, our Saturday night at the movies this month did not line up with our yarn club orders. So I'm sorry about that, but I had to do the yarn clubs early this month because I need to get out of the dye kitchen pretty soon and kind of be wrapping up that part of my life for a couple of weeks and take off while I'm waiting for baby Potion to get here and then adjusting to him being here. So I'm going to be taking some time off for maternity leave. I will still have some videos coming out, although I may have to space them out a little bit more through the end of October. My goal is to still be able to release one every week, but that just may not happen depending on his schedule and when he arrives and how we do. But even if we don't do one every week, I will continue to release videos every so often. Please, please, please follow me on social media. I have my Facebook and Instagram links below. Also my Pinterest boards. I'm starting to get more active on Pinterest and I would love to have you follow me there. And I would love for you guys to share my social media with your friends. Share this video, please, please, please. YouTube is really inundated with lots and lots of content creators, and it's great that it's open to everybody and that it's free to use and everything, but the consequence is that it gets really difficult to get your videos found out there. So the best way that I can get more people to know about my channel is for you to share them with your crafty, fiber-loving friends. And so I hope you will share this video. Please give me a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't ever miss a video. Let me know what you think of this month's movie and pattern as well. Please leave me a comment below. Tell me what you think of it. And what's your favorite Jimmy Stewart movie? He made so many good ones. It was really hard picking just one. He made so many good ones. And he was in last month's Saturday Night at the Movies with William Powell as well. We did After the Thin Man last month, and so we got to see a very young Jimmy Stewart in the 30s with William Powell, who was our star last month, and that was really, really fun as well. So let me know what your favorite Jimmy Stewart movie is, and next month we'll be doing Kim Novak. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. It is now time to cast off. Love you!